Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Redesign Your Life Today. I'm Daniel Kobryner, your host, and I'm a mental fitness coach. And this podcast is about transformation. It's about sharing stories about people who experienced transformations in their lives, who are at different parts of their lives, and who really want to share some of the experiences. And the idea being that in life, everything is possible. We can change at any time in our lives. And today, I'm very honored. We have a very special guest, and this is Ron or Ronald B. And Ron is, first of all, a US foreign policy expert. He had a focus on NATO, Russia, Middle East, and as well on and topics like Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, nuclear arms control. But as well, Ron uh, is very much involved in education. He worked for Oxford University, and he will tell us a little more about his various, roles there. And last but not least, Ron is as well a political commentator on many international networks about foreign affairs, about all what's going on now. And so this was a very brief presentation, but first of all, Ron, thank you so much for being with us today again. And I would like you to introduce you a little more. Who is Ron? And tell us about you.
Well, let's see. I was born in Oakland, California, to a musician who played in Frank Sinatra's band. Was a
Mhm.
rhythm guitarist and tenor saxophonist. My mother was a housewife and sold dresses in a local department store. And I grew up in the Bay Area of San Francisco and
Mhm.
always had a fascination with history and with languages because I had grandfather who was British and grandmother on the other side who was German. So and my they they spoke German, of course, in that household, and then French and German in my grandfather's household. So I became interested in learning languages, and so I have my father's perfect pitch, and so instead of becoming a musician, I applied it to languages
Mhm.
and made myself different because one of the big question whenever you're with somebody that is known in the musical field and what do you play? He says, well, I applied it towards languages. Um, I loved history and languages, and that's what I majored in university. Went to the University of California, San Diego, and majored in European history and French literature. I spent my third year at the University of Grenoble, took all my courses in French, uh, and uh, and developed a passion for international relations there. That got me hooked. Once you start traveling, it's hard to stop. It's almost like an addiction. And the next year, I spent a year at Oxford University uh, reading modern history, uh, following up on my history degree. So it's travel, history, languages are have been part of my passion, and the idea is, well, what do you do with that? Um, and especially if you were told at age 10, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and was told that I wouldn't live to be 20 years old.
Mhm.
And so that affected me, as you can imagine. And I didn't even know what it was. My parents didn't know what it was. I spent a month in a hospital, but I didn't feel any different. I just took some medicine and I felt fine. But all these dire predictions that I wouldn't live very long turned out to be false. And and at every stage, I'm thinking, well, I'm still here, so I might as well keep going and keep doing the things that I love to do and not worry about it. The one thing that it did prevent me from doing earlier on is to get married, because I didn't want to get married to somebody and then die. And so, but by age 35, I figured out I'm going to be around a while. I don't feel any different. So let's try this marriage thing. And I have been married 37 years this year. So in any case, what did I do? Well, I left San Diego in 1979 to go to Washington, D.C., where one of my mentors had introduced me to the Carter administration, in fact, to the president himself. And I was asked to go to Washington didn't even know where it was, frankly, because it's 3,000 miles away from California, to go to the White House and have a discussion with the president about the SALT II treaty, which is a nuclear weapons treaty that I was interested in. And one of the reasons I was interested in that is because my father was scheduled to be in the first wave of amphibious tanks to hit the beaches of Japan. He was in Patton's Third Army, and he was on his way to Okinawa for the invasion when Harry Truman dropped the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so if he hadn't done that, we wouldn't have this conversation, because he would not have lived. He was told if he made it to the beach, he would live probably 3 seconds. The next wave, 5 seconds. The next wave after that, 10 seconds. And so I became interested in nuclear weapons as a result. And my mentor at UC San Diego was Herbert York, who had worked on the atomic bomb during World War II, the Manhattan Project, as it were. And then that would lead eventually in Washington, D.C., to me working at a think tank that was involved in nuclear weapons. And my boss and I wrote this book called Looking the Tiger in the Eye, Confronting a Nuclear Threat, which became a New York Times notable book of the year and a Washington Post bestseller, and won a Christopher Award, which is the Christophers have a motto: it's better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness. And that sort of is a theme throughout the book, that we may have chosen to build and use these things, but we can choose not to use them as well, or use them wisely without exploding a weapon. And that was sort of the theme of the book, looking the tiger in the eye. What are nuclear weapons about? How did we get here, and where are we going with them? So in Washington, D.C., I worked with the Carter administration on the SALT II treaty, and I was 24 years old. Went there without a place to live, slept on a guy's couch for the 3 months. That was paid very little, but enough to eat and pay for a meal for the people I was living with every once in a while. And I was put in charge of 66 national organizations to try and get them to convince their senators to ratify the SALT II treaty. It so turned out that I was sent to many different states to give speeches at conventions and things like that. And so I knew what was happening in the field. And so the White House had me come in and brief presidential aides once a month. So I was their link to the field. 24 years old, brand new to Washington. I didn't own a suit when I got there. I just had my San Diego shorts and flip-flops and Mexican wedding shirt. And I soon learned that was not the proper uniform, and that I bought a suit, and before you know it, I looked like everybody else, except I did have a Fu Manchu mustache. I had to keep some California in me. Until later, I shaved that off too, because that was also distracting. In any case, so while in Washington, this is when the Iranian Revolution took place, and also the invasion of Afghanistan, by the Soviet Union. So these two things have been recurrent themes in foreign policy, and we're now talking about another revolution that's taking place in Iran,
Mm-hmm.
and the invasion of Afghanistan led to so many different things, but it also led to terrorism that we're still dealing with today. ISIS is in the news, and that's a reflection of what started in Afghanistan back in December of 1979. So, and also when that happened, that torpedoed the SALT II treaty. It didn't have a chance because it couldn't get ratified if the Soviets were invading countries. So I went to graduate school, leveraged that to get into graduate school, and that was
Mm-hmm.
Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a year in Bologna, Italy, uh, with and met the president of Italy. One of the things in my life is whenever I'm in school, I run for office for student body president, and I usually won grammar school, high school, undergraduate UCSD, and also at Johns Hopkins. So I always liked the applied more than the theoretical because what good is all this book learning if you don't apply it and use it somehow? Well, we got an invite to go to Rome to meet President of Italy, Alessandro Pertini, and I made a point of speaking to him in Italian,
Mm-hmm.
simply because I wanted him to know that there were Americans that spoke other languages other than dumbass English. So got hired after that at the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, Austria for the summer. My first day on the job is when Israel attacked a nuclear reactor outside Baghdad, the Ozark reactor. It was the busiest day in the history of the IAEA so far, and I arrived there on the first day. And I was asked to brief, because of my languages, French, German, and Italian, and some English. I was asked to brief the Secretary General every morning at 7 o'clock on what was in the newspapers about the Israeli raid. So that was more than interesting, but it also gave me more background in nuclear weapons issues, which I was already interested in. Came back to Washington after that, finished up the master's degree, and I got hired by the Congressional Research Service, which really affected the way I see the world, because the Congressional Research Service is part of the Library of Congress, which was started by Thomas Jefferson, and his books are still there as the original collection
Mm-hmm.
from Monticello. And the Congressional Research Service uh, has an honor and privilege to inform the members of Congress and their staffs without an opinion. You have to give all points of view from left to right, center, all schools of thought, and you cannot just give one point of view, which I had also learned to be very useful at Oxford University, where they teach you how to debate and also want you to engage and have an opinion on something, but also honor the other side with with respect. And it's always about the policy; it's never about the person. And that's something we could all learn from today with all the ad hominem attacks that happen against politicians and not the policies, but against the people. And I still find that very difficult. We become very tribal in the United States. If you're a Democrat, then the other side that is either a fascist or Hitler, and if you're a Republican, the other side is either a communist or a socialist, and those terms don't apply. In fact, they are misrepresentations of history. But that being as it may, it did affect me by working at CRS, the Congressional Research Service, and from there, I went to a think tank called Palomar Corporation, where I wrote this book with Carl Feldbaum.
Hmm.
Carl had been a Watergate lawyer, and involved in the whole Nixon debacle, and so people on his board of directors included Bob Woodward of the Washington Post, who ended up having a nice thing to say about the book, and I have a little squib on the back from Bob Woodward, and nice
Hmm.
one from a guy from Harvard. One of the things I've learned is you can very easily hero worship and be afraid to do anything with it, but it doesn't. There's no people put their pants on the same everywhere in the world, no matter what their position is. And so I never shied away from asking questions, and I've went to Washington. I stood up in the White House and asked President Carter a question, and that led to my first job. And I spent 15 years in Washington as a result of standing up and asking that question, yeah, about arms control. And when I went to Germany as a Robert Bosch Fellow, I met 3 or 4 times with Helmut Kohl directly and President von Weizsäcker directly, and in German asked them questions, and we became known to one another. And I have a book signed by Helmut Kohl, his biography, on December 7th, 1987, which was an interesting date because December 7th, of course, was the bombing of Pearl Harbor, a surprise attack. And December 7th, 1987 is when Gorbachev and Reagan signed the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty, which I had worked on at Palomar Corporation. So these things come back if you insert yourself into a situation and not be afraid, move forward, do your homework, and and if you come across as genuine, other people see you that way, and it helps you move forward not only in your own life, but it helps you get noticed and appreciated, let alone advance your career. So from there, let's see, back to Washington D.C. Went to after meeting, 1987, 88. So I was in the mayor's office of Berlin, West Berlin, right before the wall came down, and I was on their staff. So every morning, they go, "Mr. B, what's the American point of view?" And I says, "I can tell you one American's point of view. It's not the American's point of view, but I'll tell you mine." And I had great independence, and I wrote a speech or two for him in German that he used, and I advised him on his meetings with President Reagan on what he could and shouldn't say. So it just you're asked these questions and you just do it. You don't worry about it. Another time when I was at Palomar Corporation, I get this call from my boss. "Well, you're testifying in a secret meeting tomorrow." "Oh, that's nice. What am I testifying about?" "About chemical weapons, because French, German, Italian, and the European point of view. The Presidential Commission on Chemical Warfare wants you to come testify." And it says, "Who am I going to testify for?" It says, "Well, it's Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was a national security advisor, Alexander Haig, who was the Secretary of State, a Republican Secretary of State, and Zbigniew was under Carter, national security, the head of the World Bank, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from the Pentagon." I said, "Oh, okay, so nobody really important, huh?" And I stayed up all night to type my testimony on what Europeans felt about nuclear weapons and chemical weapons, for that matter. And I get there with my 10 pages ready to read it, and Zbigniew Brzezinski takes the paper away from me and says, "Tell us what you really think. What's important in here? Give us the highlights." And I learned there that no matter what you prepare, you have to be able to explain something, boil it down to its basic facts, so that you can convince somebody of a point of view and then move forward. Uh, that is something we don't necessarily teach at our universities. And I use that to teach students that they needed to learn how to think on their feet. They needed to learn how to write effectively, because if you can't write, you can't speak. And if you can't speak, you can't write. So uh, it became if you will, a jihad for me to teach people how to write because they didn't know how to do it. And my students appreciate that. And so I still write. I'm writing I've written 6 books,
Hmm.
mostly on foreign policy, nuclear weapons, U.S.-German relations, U.S.-European relations, and I'm co-editing a book on the future of transatlantic relations with a colleague at New York University called Transatlantic Tomorrow's Foreign Policy Lessons Learned. And that'll come out next year. So I'm still writing, and and uh, and I have after I well, let's see, one more interesting thing. Um, I came back from Washington D.C. to San Diego because I just loved it here in terms of it was a great place. I thought to raise a family, so I wanted to raise a family outside of the hubbub of Washington D.C. And that became important because people said, "Why are you leaving D.C.? You're so good. You're perfect for here." And I said, I want a life. I want a private life." And you could raise a child in DC, but you would never see them because you work all the time, 16
Hmm.
hours a day.
Hmm.
And so I got hired at the UC Institute on Global Conflict and Cooperation in 1994, moved back to San Diego, got married that same year, and worked for my old mentor, Herbert York, who had founded this institute. And it had one of its main things it did was to conduct track two diplomacy, which means you go there in an informal matter with formal representatives. The representatives, you go there and brainstorm, no press in the room, so that they don't have to worry what they're talking about, and so that you can come up with ideas to solve problems. And the University of California Institute on Global Conflict and Cooperation had a track two diplomacy in Northeast Asia with North Korea, Russia, China, uh, Japan, and both and South Korea and the United States, and they also had a um, Middle East track two diplomacy, one with just military and others with political leaders. And at a certain point, I was put in charge of the military program from 2000 to 2006. What happened during those years? 9/11,
Hmm.
the 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 invasion of Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and then in 2006, Hamas gets elected to Gaza, and that's when all the problems started in Gaza, which we are dealing with today, in a different form, aren't we? So we were there at a very difficult time, and I co-led this with an admiral from the Pentagon, uh, because you have to know your audience. Even though I had done work at the Pentagon while in Washington D.C. on nuclear weapons and national security, um, the you had to have an admiral by your side so that they would listen to the other military guy, not the civilian,
Hmm.
uh, because military with military experience is going to carry more weight than somebody that hadn't served in the field or carried a gun. And so knowing your audience is another very important uh, thing to realize. And no matter what the audience is, you better know what it is and who you're speaking to, or else it will go south very quickly. Whether it's students, a World Affairs Council, retired people, or military officers, you have to put yourself in their mindset if you want to communicate well. And so that's what I learned in the Middle East, and we saved some lives. I know that. I know it for a fact. But you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how sometimes very simple ideas have not been thought about. Um, uh, how would you like to move forward on this? I don't want this to be a
No. I
monologue.
mean, this has been it's fascinating, Ron. I mean, and perhaps I'd ask. I mean, first of all, just I find it amazing. I mean, it's amazing because you are living proof that when you have a passion, I mean, you said passion for history,
Yeah.
for international affairs, for
Hmm.
languages, right?
Yeah.
And then you were able to kind of translate this passion into a
Yeah.
job, into a
It's
career.
yeah, I wasn't afraid to do it, and I think part of it stems from that 10-year-old conversation and say, well, you're not going to live to be 20, so well then I'm going to live my life. If everybody had that conversation at age 10, what could they have done? You know?
Exactly. And you see, the other thing which comes to mind, Ron, and you said it's a few times, is we have to empower ourselves.
Yeah.
If we wait for others to do, I mean,
No.
things to come from others, it doesn't come. And what you were telling us as well, that from an early age, you you decided to take on responsibilities, leading, for instance, I don't know, associations. I don't know how you say in
Yeah,
English,
student
but yeah,
student
school,
councils. Yeah.
exactly, and this really helped you, like, live. I mean, give the best of yourself and already taken responsibilities from a
And
quite
taking risks and taking
and
risks.
taking risks as well. Yes.
The in high school, we filed suit against the school district as student body president because they were not funding women's sports, and that was in 1972, 73. That went all the way to the Supreme Court and became Title IX in the United States, which requires equal funding for women's sports. It has since become other things. But at a reception in Washington, D.C., 10 years later in 1982,
Mhm.
someone comes up to me and says, did you do something for women's sports? They saw my name on a name tag at a reception. And I said, yes, how did you know that? He says, well, you're one of the 40 male heroes of the decade for Ms. Magazine. It just came out today. So you may want to go buy a copy. And so I said, all right. I had no idea. And but there, every time I hear that someone has gone to the Olympics because of Title IX, I just smile and know that it's helped people. Or when somebody is alive in the Middle East because of things we did behind the scenes, I just smile. You don't need to be patted on the head for what you do. You have to just do it and not worry about getting a report card. Do the right thing, and there is much self-satisfaction that you can get over the longer term. Um, but if you don't take the initiative, nothing happens.
Exactly. And what you said as well, Ron, thanks for that. It's when you said about apply what you learned. The theory is good, but apply it. And I really enjoyed the examples where you had to give this briefing. I think it was Mr. Brzezinski who was there, and,
Yep.
and basically he said, okay, forget about what you write. What's your
What's
take?
important? What are the main points?
Exactly. And
But it helped me, Oxford helped me think on my feet. And I said, well, yeah, let me think about this. Well, the most important thing is Mitterrand was just sitting there with Kohl and Verdun holding hands. Do you think they're gonna want to talk about chemical weapons modernization? Uh, and they saw chemical weapons like the Japanese saw nuclear weapons. They lived through a World War I with a terrible use of and they're still finding chemical weapons coming up from the soil in Belgium from the Germans that don't want to clean it up, and it's still a mess. And so it's a bad memory for them. They don't want to create more bad memories. That was my statement. And everyone nodded. Oh, that makes sense. You know. So you have to be able to boil it down to something that's going to resonate, something that's going to make people say, aha, that makes sense. Think of all the politicians and the newscasters that just blah, 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 and more of that. And what did they say? I don't know. Yeah. And then you move forward and say that was a waste of time. You don't want to waste people's time, and you don't want to waste your time because, I learned at age 10 that every minute is precious. So make the most of it.
Exactly. Now, thanks for that. This is so powerful as well. And you see something again, which is amazing when you were telling us about your story. I mean, you interacted on a personal level. I mean, with presidents like Jimmy Carter or Chancellor Helmut Kohl or Alessandro Pertini in Italy. How did it feel for a young man, just to have a talk with these people? Were you kind of intimidated or
It
not
was
at all?
exhilarating. It was exhilarating
It was,
because it was exhilarating because, but I kept my cool. But afterwards, I must have been glowing for a week and a half because I just spoke with the president. I just spoke with the chancellor. I spoke with the president von Weizsäcker about his
Weizsäcker,
brother
yeah,
and
yeah,
the German
yeah.
atom bomb project. I spoke with Pertini about his time in prison with Gramsci. Uh, and uh, and I was using formal Italian, and he put his hand on my knee and said, "Oh, use informal." And I said, "Cosa pensi? What the hell do you think about this then?" And he laughed, and the translator went like this. Uh, but by the end of it, we were supposed to be there 10 minutes. We were there for an hour and a half because we were enjoying each other's company.
Thank you so much for that. And you see, again, what comes to mind, Ron, when you just, mentioned that as well, is that when you are really interested in learning, again,
Yeah,
it's not because you have to, but because really you like to know what's happened and the history of a country. Again, just, to then things change. I mean, you can have these conversations and people who might have very high positions, but they look at you. I mean, you are a person, you are a person who is interested, who knows. And then I guess the conversation level.
you used a very important word, interested.
Mhm.
If you've done your homework, it shows you are interested. If you listen, it shows you're interested. If you speak less and listen more, uh, you're interested. And in conflict resolution, which I've also been involved in the Middle East and also with India and Pakistan, it you have to listen more than speak. You have two ears and one mouth, right? So there's a reason. Um, but the being interested, there was funny. In the Middle East, we had a German representative. He was the speechwriter for the chancellor. Uh, Reinhard Hesse was his name. Uh,
Mhm.
and nice guy. We became dear friends. And he wanted to know who I was in the worst way. He says, "Who is this guy? He speaks French and German. He's American. He must be CIA because nobody speaks languages and this sort of thing." And so he had me followed, and they did a whole profile on me. And then he took me to lunch in Berlin at one of our Middle East meetings. It says, we came to the conclusion you were just interested in this. How is that possible? So it's
Well,
possible because I've always been interested
it,
in
it,
international relations, and I have a German grandmother who emigrated here, and I have my other grandfather studied in Bonn and went to France to learn French, and so I just followed in their footsteps because I found it interesting. And being interested means more than just saying you're interested. You have to act it and prove that you're genuine.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, of course, I have to say it resonates a lot with me around on a personal basis because I had parents who were always interested. I mean, they come from Eastern Europe originally, and
Yeah,
there were a lot
my
of, there's a lot of
uh,
history in our family.
Poland on my mother's side. My mother's maiden name was Rakowski.
Right. And from my side, it was in Poland as well. And it was,
Oh yeah, Krakow,
yeah,
Krakow. That's where
well,
I came.
yeah, actually, yeah. And but because they were there, I was brought up in an environment, they were listening to the news, they were talking at the table,
Yeah,
so I got interested. I mean, it was natural. And this is the way they were talking to their friends. And see that there's another word which we can use as well. We can use
mhm.
curious, but curious in a good way. I mean, not like wanting to know what other people do, but really just interested in learning. And this, it's, when you do this without expectation, right? You just because you like to do this.
Yeah. It
It, it-
shows. It
yeah.
shows. People recognize it at a certain point, and you move forward. One other thing I'd like to add that I think is very important. When I came back to California, I've got the opportunity not just to continue with foreign policy and conflict resolution, but I got an opportunity to teach. I started teaching and giving back to the students and teaching them how to write and teaching them something called a policy memo, which helps them think through an issue and having a point of view of your own rather than just swallow something and spit it back up, as a lot of education is. If you went through the French system, some of the old, I remember some classes you were not allowed to ask questions. You just sat there and wrote it down, and then the exam came and you spit it
It's
back.
exactly. I went through the
Uh,
French system.
yeah, that was a French system, and so I decided I would not teach that way, and that I would teach about what really happens in foreign policy from a practitioner's point of view, and I required that every student write a policy memo, and they had to be a point of view, and teach them how to do it, and I teach them how to write actively because writing is just atrocious these days, and
Mhm.
I was shocked at how bad college student writing was. And so I that became something I taught him to do. And then when when I finished up in the Middle East, I came back and I was so frustrated because we had made progress in Gaza. We I was part of the team that negotiated the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza.
Mhm.
In fact, we came up with a way to do it. We and they all left in 3 weeks. They thought it was going to take a year and a half, but you never heard anything about it because nobody got killed. What does that tell you about the press? You have to have somebody killed before it makes the news. And and I came back and I sat at this dinner and there was this nice gentleman there who was the head of a foundation. He says, "Well, tell me about your fascinating work in the Middle East." And I says, "I'm so frustrated because it's so clear we're failing the next generation, and they need to learn diplomatic skills. And we should create an institute to teach young people diplomatic skills." And he goes, "How much money do you need?" And
Mhm.
I go, "You're kidding me." So he gave me $3 million to start the avocado money made from avocados, because the Hansen Foundation was Fred J. Hansen, who was a Danish immigrant who who started the Haas avocado that
Mhm.
and came up with that and made a bunch of money and on the land that he owned and had this foundation. And he also believed in travel and having Americans travel and others come here to see this country. And so we brought 25 students from overseas, called it the Hansen Summer Institute on
Mhm.
Leadership and International Cooperation. It's now just called the Hansen Leadership Institute. It's still going. And that was in 2005. And we bring people from war zones, students. They have to be good students that are obviously on their way to becoming practitioners. put them with Americans, and teach them diplomatic skills, teach them how to give a speech, teach them how to write, teach them how to speak in front of somebody, but tell their story in a direct and active way. And so, and I put Palestinians with Israelis in the same room. They had to sleep overnight and go to breakfast and lunch and dinner together. Russians and Ukrainians in the same room. Azeris and Armenians in the same room. Because I knew so much about the conflicts in this area. One of the books I wrote was the Access Guide to the Breakup of the Soviet Union. So I knew all of the 15 republics and knew all of the conflicts that existed within those. So, well, why don't we bring people from these countries so they can learn from others and get some training and go back and change things. So paying it forward, I guess, is it, to boil it down. We need to pay it forward. And there's a great deal of satisfaction when someone 10 years later calls you up and says, Ron, you have no idea how you changed my life. Takes you to lunch. You have no idea how many lives you've influenced by your teaching. And I said, well, that's wonderful to know. But I do it to share my expertise and I enjoy doing it. So why not do it? Do what you love, and it shows.
Well, and we can see your passion, and something came to mind when you were speaking, Ron, because you were talking about your experience as well in Oxford,
Yeah.
when you were reading history, and when it's about everything, it's about debating, it's about looking at the various points of view, and I
Yeah.
knew about that because my son studied geography in Oxford, and
Oh, we did.
he was in
Awesome.
the
Which
debating.
college? Which college? I was at
Uh,
Worcester.
uh, I've
You
got
know,
I have a little blank now, so I will.
it's okay. There's 36 of them, and it's
No, no,
hard
no.
to know.
It was one of the most
Was it
recent
Maudlin?
ones.
Maudlin or
No,
one of
no,
those?
one of the most recent ones. Uh, it will come
Okay,
back.
that's okay. All
But
right, they're all good. They're all good.
yeah, 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 no, no. But so, and you see, when we talked about, for instance, you had like Israeli and Palestinians, Ukrainians and Russians, Azeri and Armenians.
Yeah,
What people really need to realize that everybody sees the world through lenses. And this is very often due to education and the surroundings. But when we start being open to really being curious about understanding the other's point of view, it's without thinking of, with putting our ego on the side, just to understand where they're coming from, why are they doing things. When
you're
we
exactly right. You're exactly right. I had a teacher in high school who I learned this from, and he called it a frame of reference. What's your frame of reference? If you come from a poor family, a rich family, if you come from a country that's been at war, a country that's been at peace, if you come from somebody that's got money or somebody that doesn't have money, you have a different frame of reference on how the world works. And there's so many different frames of references that you need to be very careful when you go into a new situation and listen more than you talk before you say anything. And that was also very useful. Another useful thing I learned, and it's a grown-up way of doing business. And the grown-up way of doing business is there's there's no limit to what you can achieve if you're willing not to take credit for it.
exactly, yes,
And that is, I didn't do anything. It was the Israelis and the Palestinians that did something. I didn't do anything. It was the Iraqi Kurds, Shia, and Sunnis that did something, and I was involved in settling some disputes between them after the war broke out that ended up saving bunch of American and Allied lives. But if you don't think that way, all you need to do, you get a pat on the head like you're in kindergarten, get a gold star. But once you grow up, you really shouldn't think that way. You just do it for the right reasons. Do it because it's the right thing to do. And I do believe that there is something called karma, that what goes around comes around. And if you're cool about it, the world will be cool back to you.
Absolutely. You see, I mean, a lot of this resonate. By the way, I found the name. It's St. Peter's College.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah,
So
I know where it
it
is. Yeah.
just came back. And when I said, when you put people together, they realize that, oh, they have families and they have this and they have their life. And all of a sudden they start talking and you realize that, well, actually, of course, there's a lot of common grounds. And when you put the ego on the side, because very often it's this, and you talk about karma. I very much believe in that, of course. I mean,
Hmm.
it's like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's where you start a momentum. And this is how some peace treaties were, when Sadat, signed the peace treaty with Israel. I mean, it was
Jimmy Carter and yeah, Begin. Yeah.
with Begin, who would have thought something like that? You see, I mean, it's just like, but it takes,
Bitter enemies, and then you have to give Carter a lot of credit on that one. He just stayed at it. He stayed at it, and they both gave him a lot of credit, and that very important treaty, very controversial treaty for those that disagreed with it, including Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. Then it's in their charter that that was the worst agreement ever signed because it recognized the right of Israel to exist.
yeah, exactly.
And then Jordan followed suit in 1994. I know a little bit about that one. That was through track two diplomacy that happened. And we were involved in the Gaza withdrawal, and we were using that as an example where we could move forward to do the same thing with the West Bank. But when then Hamas got elected, it all went south.
Well, you see, Ron, I listened to you, and obviously, this is, I mean, it's fabulous, really, the experience you have. And so now, I mean, I suppose people that need your expertise in so many of these areas could be what's going on in Gaza, what's going on in Ukraine, even I
Yeah,
know,
I was offered a job. Oh, I spent 2 summers in Moscow after the fall of the Berlin Wall with the Freedom Support Act, and I was offered a job in Ukraine and uh, to run a exchange program. And I was offered a job in San Diego at the same time. I took the one in San Diego. If I'd have taken it in Ukraine, I'd still be there.
wow.
Yeah.
So, and if there was one experience, I mean, really just one, which kind of really shaped you and which really, what would it be in all your career or something where which in you provoked a change? Is there anything you would think of?
Oh, there are a number of things.
Or it could be several as well, huh? Ron?
Yeah. Well, I think it's okay to bring it up. I don't think it's classified or anything like that, but it was with the Israelis and the Palestinians that in 2005 we the war in Iraq was still on. The there were problems. Sharon had decided that it was too big a political liability to have Israelis in Gaza,
Hmm.
and so I organized a meeting between the Israeli delegation, and they were all high-level generals that all had lunch every week with Sharon. And on the Palestinian side, they were all personal friends or relatives of Yasser Arafat.
Hmm.
His nephew was in the delegation, And so I sat with the Palestinians, and I had Fred Hoff, who was an ambassador to Syria, a wonderful man, diplomat, sitting with the Israelis. And I had Admiral on one side, a Colonel on the other side, just Americans observing so that they could interject whenever. And I started off by saying, I don't want to hear about dead relatives. I'm tired of hearing about your grandfather was killed by my grandfather.
Hmm.
We've heard that. We're now in closed session. You've said it all in public. This is a closed session.
Hmm.
Uh, I'd like to think of stepping out of the trenches of history and walking forward towards your grandchildren. What do you want your grandchildren's life to look like? Do you want them to become suicide bombers, or do you want them to be killed by suicide bombers? That's where we need to start here.
Hmm.
And uh, then uh, then I looked over. It was all kind of pre-planned. I looked over to the admiral because I wanted him to take the next step, because he would speak with more authority, because he had seen men die, and he had actually commanded the ship that took George H.W. Bush to meet Gorbachev in Malta. And so I knew that he'd have plenty of street cred, as they call it, street credibility. And so, so I nodded, and he nodded and said, "All right, Israelis, you want to leave, right? Yeah, we we've been told we need to figure out a way to leave. Palestinians, do you want them to leave or not? Well, we don't want them to destroy the greenhouses because they're important things for our economy there. And Palestinians, do you want them to leave or not? Well, I suppose we do. Isn't it? I suppose we do. And I said, well, then why don't you jointly plan it so that nobody gets hurt? Nobody had thought of it. And so we quietly, American military trained both sides on joint patrols on how you do that. And as a result, as a result, all the Israelis, they were not happy to leave, but they all left peaceably. Nobody got killed. It took 3 weeks instead of they thought it was going to take a year and a half to do. And you never heard anything about it because nobody got killed. Right.
Yeah, yeah,
And it
absolutely.
was a major accomplishment, and lives were saved. Um, the second thing that I think was probably, uh, well, let's just say, um, it, the Iraq War was very difficult, especially in the Al Anbar province, where there was a lot of Al Qaeda, and the Al Qaeda were killing as many Iraqis as they were Americans.
Hmm.
And then the Sunni were there fighting Americans, but not fighting Al Qaeda. And the Sunnis started figuring out that they were getting killed by both sides. And so I had a general of Saddam who was responsible for chemical and nuclear weapons. Uh, and so we had something in common there. So I could talk to him about that. The American military that was at this meeting were not very happy because he was the general at the Baghdad airport that had killed a bunch of Americans. But the fact of the matter that he had killed a bunch of Americans didn't prevent me from wanting him to stop killing more.
Hmm.
And so we invited him to the meeting, and I put him on a panel, and I sat next to him in between a Kurdish and Shia uh, military. And it turns out that the Kurdish general, had taught him at military academy. And the Shia got off the panel, was so upset at that we put a Sunni on, that he left. And I've got all these, American national security people watching me. What is he going to do now? And I said, well, uh, I think the main thing we should think about is that Al Qaeda is the enemy, not us. We're here to get rid of Al Qaeda, and you should too. So you ought to cooperate on getting rid of Al Qaeda. And that had not occurred to them.
Mhm.
And so I gave them some money, and they went to dinner. I left. I let them talk amongst themselves in Arabic, and they came back and says, "You're right. So what do we do?" And that was the beginning of something called the Surge, that eliminated Al Qaeda from Al Anbar province, and saved lots of lives in the process. But it was an opportunity that uh, just presented itself, and you have to be able to act on those opportunities. It's where preparation meets opportunity is where creativity happens.
Well, Ron, thank you so much for sharing in these stories.
Yeah,
And I mean, it's like, see, when you
there
look
are
at that,
others, but those are two of the more important ones.
no, thank you so much. And it's, you see, when listen, I have to say, it's fascinating. We could talk for hours. I love this subject, and it's like just this last example. It's really, it's not even being. I mean, it's really it's being an actor. It's being an actor in history. I mean, we again, it's you're there and it really wanting the best for everyone. But it's this thing. I
And
mean,
you
this
build the
feeling. It just.
relationships. If you meet, these meetings would happen once or 2 or 3 times a year, and
Mhm,
you'd have the same people go, and they understood the rules. It was Chatham House rules. You know what those are.
mhm.
And that is that what you say here stays here. And everybody knew that everybody brought their intelligence guys and they were taking notes, but that was part of the process. We wanted to be open about everything.
Mhm.
And so that would go back. You could say what was here, but just don't put it in the press, and don't make it a political liability. And so that was also very important, that everything had to remain confidential. And in democratic countries, that's a difficult thing to do because everything's got to be on social media all the time, and half of it's nonsense. So you never know what's true and what's not.
Well, exactly. And when now you see that some presidents nearly, rule with social medias. It's like
Well,
before
that's where
anybody.
the statements come out on
Exactly.
X, or yeah,
Or
it's on X where
truth
the
social
or
or
Truth Social in terms of
I mean
Trump.
you
He
you,
created
you
he created
oh,
his own social media as
exactly.
only he could do.
Yeah, this last year must have been for you kind of I mean, I don't
I'm
know.
very busy. I'm
Yes,
very busy on TV, radio, local
very
TV on 3 or 4 different stations, local radio. Whenever something bad happens or could happen, I get called.
well,
And I'm happy to explain it as best I can. I was on call this morning at 5 in the morning because local Fox 5 station thought that we were going to attack Iran. And so they wanted me in as soon as that happened. I said, as long as I can get home for my podcast with Daniel,
well.
I'll do that.
No, it's you see it's a but when you see, for instance, I mean, obviously. Okay, there have been this relationship between the US and all the rest of the world since World War II with NATO, with
Yeah,
buildings. And it took time and it took trust to build it. And
sure
with
did.
what we see going on today, I mean, of course, I'm looking
Well,
from outside, but it's really,
it was for
it's so
background and
amazing.
context. That's part of that policy memo. It's all background and context. How did we get here, and why is it important? Economically, politically, and militarily. Those are the three prisms that you look through for foreign policy, and those are
Mhm.
the interests, the stakes, why things are important. And it's rarely one of those things that drives policy, but it's the multiple things. All three things have to be aligned before any policy shift happens. And NATO was first of all a political organization, political military, uh, and, and the EU is really the economic side of the fence. That the economics of Europe are handled by the EU, And the politics are EU as well as NATO, and the military part is political military, and that includes Canada and the United States and Turkey among interesting partners. So it's background and context are very important, and I still think even though there are also always calls to get out of NATO, and France, as you know, left NATO in 1966
Yes.
under de Gaulle.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Um, I spent a summer at the Quai d'Orsay.
Oh,
It,
okay.
you know, I had a French professor in Italy who worked for Mitterrand on nuclear matters, and he gave me a desk at the Quai d'Orsay because I could speak French. And
It's
he gave
wonderful.
me all these articles on the development of the French nuclear deterrent. And so I became an expert on that thanks to French language. And so it's pretty important to understand whenever there's a disagreement, there's a reason for it, and you need to dig in more than just make accusations and call someone names before you come back with a response, because the response, if you start with a bad statement, you're going to get a bad response.
Yeah, absolutely. Ron, thank you so much, for for this conversation. I mean, it's been absolutely fascinating, and we could go for hours, and perhaps
I know.
and perhaps and
It bore people
we'll
to
have
death.
another one, Ron. We'll have another one because it's but if you were to leave our the people listening and watching this
Yeah,
podcast with like three thoughts, three tips,
yeah,
what would it be?
yeah. I feel like I'm in front of Brzezinski now. That's sort of what he asked.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I
but
didn't know
that's
that.
fine, but I'm happy with that because this just demonstrates what you need to do. The
Mhm.
first is do what you love.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The second is think before you speak,
Mhm.
and the third is do your homework.
As people say, I think in English, short and sweet. Yes.
Right to the point. And
So,
and, and there's no pillowy clouds or Maupassant or Voltaire about it. It's this you boil it down to the basics, and those are three things I've lived my life by and taught, and I think are useful in any context, foreign policy or otherwise.
absolutely. So, well, really, thank you so much. When people want to get in touch with you, Ron, for
Yes,
what's the best way?
I have a website called learnthroughtravel.com,
Learn
and
through travel.
that
Okay.
promotes Oxford. You can get in touch with me there and also take a look if you want to go to Oxford and add some resume capital to your CV. And students are finding it useful as well as lifelong learners. I'm also on Facebook as Ronald B.
Okay.
I'm
Mhm.
on X at Ron JB, and I'm on Instagram at Ronald B.
Well, again, thank you so much for being with us. I mean, it was really a treat to have you as a guest, Ron.
Well, it was my pleasure, and I think you're doing a great service by having a podcast like this, simply to help people, you know, get beyond the social media into real things that matter in their lives.
Well, I really appreciate. Thank you so much, and for everybody watching. I hope you got a lot of really wonderful insights. And as Ron said, be curious, be interested. It's really know things. And this will make
You
a
can even use my email address if you're curious about following up with me. I'm very open. It's beehive, Beehive, LaRouche, if you will.
la ruche des abeilles. Yes.
Beehive dot initial R, initial B at gmail.com. So if you want to follow up on any of this, I'm there, and genuine questions will get genuine responses.
I mean, this is beautiful. And I've got one ask for everybody watching. And thank you really for everyone who is now with us. And please make sure to pass on this podcast to your friends, your family, and people who would be interested, because really there was so much today. So thank you very much for everybody who was there and for your time. And I will see you at the next episode.
Merci mille fois, Daniel.
Bye bye.
Okay.